Started here. Hey, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. So, I'm State Senator Ethan Corson. Want to welcome everybody. We have some new faces. We have some faces that we haven't seen for a while. So, we really appreciate you giving us this time on a Saturday. This is our 67th consecutive monthly town hall. So, really proud of that. My district boundaries for any of the newer folks are 47th Street out to about 95th Street, and then state line to about 6 blocks west of Metcalf. So a good sized chunk of Northeast Johnson County. I will remind everybody, since we are so close there, early voting has started. And you can vote right after this at the Northeast Johnson County office at 6000 Lamar and Martway. So if you haven't already voted, would encourage you to just go ahead and knock that out today on your way home, because many of you are literally going to drive by the early voting location at 6000 Lamar. And the hours are 9 to 7. They'll be open this week and then Saturday, and then obviously, I think they have limited hours on Monday, and then election day will be Tuesday, the August 4th. So, two issues I want to cover today before I turn it over to my colleagues. On the theme of elections, one big thing that has happened since we last met is that a district court in Douglas County has stayed the law that passed the legislature that did away with the 3-day grace period. So as of right now, the 3-day grace period is back in effect for this upcoming election. So what that means is that this is how it has been since we passed it in 2017. That ballots that are postmarked, mailed by 7 p.m. on Election Day on Tuesday will be counted as long as they arrive at the election office by close of business Friday. Now, the Secretary of State has filed a motion asking for that ruling to be stayed. Attorney General Kobach has appealed to the Kansas Supreme Court. So, keep your eyes peeled, but at least as of now, that 3-day grace period is back in effect. And I'll just say, I've always think that the term grace period is a little bit incorrect, and that there really should be a better term for it, because grace period implies that the voter has done something wrong and we're giving the voter grace, when really it is just allowing for the delays in the mail system that have nothing to do with the fault of the voter. The voter got their ballot in before the end of the election. It was in the mail. And so I've always felt that was a little bit confusing and sort of inaptly named, but that sort of is what it's been referred to regularly. So just to give you some numbers of how this would impact our elections, 2020 obviously was a big outlier because of the pandemic and the amount of mail voting. But if we had not had the grace period in the 2020 presidential election, in Kansas, that would have amounted to 32,000 votes that would not have been counted. Those are ballots that were mailed on or before Election Day and received after the election. In 2022, it was 1,000 ballots across the state that would not have been counted without the 3-day window. And in 2024, it would have been 2,100. So a not insignificant number of votes that sort of determine that would or would not be counted depending on whether this 3-day window is in effect. So keep an eye, but again, thankfully, at least for now, we have that for this election. And really what the judge said is just that this law has the effect of being very arbitrary and very indiscriminate as far as how it's applied, because you're essentially you could be penalizing one set of Kansans because they live in a part of the state where the mail takes longer. And so somebody who mailed their ballot at the identical time one of those ballots may be counted because it arrives more quickly, and the other ballot may not be counted. And so that arbitrariness was really what the judge was very concerned by, that, one Kansan's ballot would be counted and the other Kansans wouldn't, even though they were mailed at the same time. The other issue that I found really interesting is a collection of our nonprofits in Kansas came together and they did a really deep dive about how Kansas has and will continue to be affected by the One Big Beautiful Bill that was passed last year at the federal level. And they did a really good job of breaking down really what that means in a granular basis for us here in Kansas. So I wanted to share some of the highlights or lowlights of how that is going to affect us here on the ground. So in terms of SNAP, the SNAP program, the administrative costs for that, the cost to run that, previously have always been split 50-50 between the state of Kansas and all other states and the federal government. There was a change in the One Big Beautiful Bill that now says that states now bear 75% of the administrative cost of running the SNAP program in that particular state. So in Kansas, that is going to mean that we're going to spend an additional $16.4 million to continue to administer the SNAP program because of the additional administrative costs that now will be borne by the states when it was previously a 50-50 split. We will also, at least for the foreseeable future, be paying about $40 million a year more as a state because our error rate is not below 6%. The bill said that if a state has a SNAP error rate that is higher than 6%, there's a penalty. And keep in mind, the important thing I want to be sure that folks understand is that an error rate does not mean fraud. So that is often not clear. Those are often used simultaneously. Error rate just means there was an error on an application, something wasn't filled out properly. It does not indicate any fraud going on in the program. Only 9 states, to give you a sense of how this law is impacting states, only 9 states right now have an error rate below 6%. So 41 of this, so we're just one of the 41 states that are going to be paying this additional amount. And so when you add it together, it ends up being about $56 million additional that the state is going to cover for the SNAP program. The other thing that is going to be a detriment to our SNAP program is that 11,000 kids in Kansas that previously qualified for SNAP now no longer qualify because the legislation put in additional requirements around work requirements, narrowed the exemptions, increased barriers, made it more difficult to apply. So that's now 11,000 kids who are food insecure, who were previously able to get SNAP and now are not able to do so. It also is going to affect our school districts, and Board Member Haas may be able to talk about this in a more articulate way, but the way that it works is that if a student is currently on SNAP or Medicaid, they do not have to separately apply for free or reduced price lunch. So it is less burdensome for the school to process that paperwork. It is less burdensome for the family to have just another thing that they have to fill out. So if we have fewer kids who are on SNAP, in a lot of these school districts, that's going to be another form that the parents are going to have to fill out. And the law now is that if you have a certain percentage of kids who qualify, then the entire school can just get free and reduced price lunch. So it's probably going to mean that fewer Kansas schools will have free or reduced price lunch. And then on the healthcare piece, this is something that I've raised before, but wanted to come back to you with sort of the latest statistics. One of the things we've talked about previously is how the expiration of the ACA tax exemption, or sorry, tax credits rather, at the end of 2025 has led to fewer Kansans who are getting health insurance through the healthcare exchange. So we now have data, because this has now been in effect long enough that we actually have some data about what the expiration of these tax credits means. So we have now 20% fewer Kansans enrolled in healthcare plans on the ACA exchange than we did previous to the law, to the expiration of those tax credits. So that's from February 2025 to February 2026 is the data that we're looking at. So we dropped by 20% of the number of people who are enrolled. The nationwide average was only 13%. So we were disproportionately harmed by this law in terms of the number of Kansans who are no longer able to afford to get their health insurance on the ACA exchange. And what has happened to those folks in most instances is that they are low-income Kansans, and they are forced to either go without insurance or to buy a plan that has a very high deductible, or a plan with very little benefits, or some combination of a low benefit, high deductible plan. So those are folks who are not able to have the same quality of insurance than they did previously. And for those folks who are able to continue to get their healthcare through the ACA exchange, even without the tax credits, their premiums went up on average by 114%. And so the Kansas economy is doing well, but I don't know that many workers who are getting 114% raises year over year. So definitely we've been heavily impacted on the SNAP piece, heavily impacted on the healthcare piece. I'm glad to talk about more, glad to talk about all of this more during the Q&A piece. And the important context that all this is happening in is that we have a budget in 2027 that is projected to spend $400 million more, a state budget's projected to spend $400 million more than we are taking in as a state. So we are already out of whack as a state, and now we're going to be shouldering the $56 million for SNAP. We're going to have more uninsured Kansans, which is going to negatively impact us in a variety of ways. So I just wanted to point those couple things out, and I'm going to turn over to my colleague. On such a happy note.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a good crowd. I think I saw 3 people that melted out in the parking lot there, so I'm very impressed that you're here this morning. So I'm Representative Jerry Stogsdill. I represent the 21st District. My district goes from 67th Street to 83rd, and then State Line over to just a block or 2 past Metcalf. And this will be my 6th term. I'm fairly confident of winning. I'm running unopposed this time. So, which I highly encourage you to do if you ever run for office, believe me. And anyway, it's getting down to that time of the year where we're going to make some critical decisions, and I think Democrats are going to do really well all across the state this year. And I kind of wanted to give you a little thing about what I did coming over here. I stopped at a garage sale. I've watched way too much Antiques Roadshow to ever pass up a garage sale. So I stopped at this garage sale in Prairie Village, and the guy knew who I was. He was one of my constituents. And he said, I'm a lawyer, and I work in Missouri. And he said, they are doing some of the dumbest laws in reference to our judicial system in Missouri that you could possibly imagine. And he said, you guys are almost beating us out with that vote no or vote yes thing. And he said, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. As an attorney, that is absolutely not the way you don't want to elect your Supreme Court judges. You want them appointed based on competency and an experience and political neutrality. So he said, I'm a lifelong Republican, and he said, I cannot believe it, but he said, I might vote a straight Democratic ticket this year. Yeah. Yeah. I said, I will drive you to the polls. So, anyway, not a whole lot to report on the things that I've been involved with in Topeka right at the moment. It's going to be we're going to do a lot of stuff between now and January when we go back. I serve on the Water Committee. A couple of things that happened this week that I'm not real happy about. We've done great work on the Water Committee in addressing water issues in Kansas. And unfortunately, the head of the Kansas Water Department is retiring this year, Connie Owens. And she has been fantastic to work with. I called her yesterday and told her that I was submitting legislation that would make it illegal for her to retire until 2 years after I'm dead, at least. So anyway, Connie has done a wonderful job for us, and I'm sure she'll find a replacement that will allow us to continue to do good work. Unfortunately, Washington is really muddying the waters, if you would. With they're lowering the standards for keeping our water clean and healthy, and now they're reporting that there is more nutrients in the water than what we've ever had before, and that's from fertilizers, from agriculture, and weed killers, and so that's another issue we're going to have to deal with when we go back in January. Is how's that affecting our water? And what we need to do about it if it is impacting our water. My second committee that I work on in Topeka is education, and I've been working with some educators and educational associations across the state to see what we need to do to address the teacher shortage that we've had in Kansas over these last few years. And want to work with the State Board of Education, with Melanie and her group, and our local school boards and so on, and our teacher associations, because one of the reasons I ran again this year was the entire state school finance bill is up for redoing next year. And we've got to have pro-education people who are going to support a equitable plan for our teachers and so on. I pointed out to people, I said, I looked at what has really caused Johnson County to flourish, to become the most successful, the most prosperous county in the state of Kansas. Apparently, it's not our alpine skiing or big wave surfing or the fact that we have fewer trees than Jackson County, Missouri. It's our schools. Our schools built Johnson County, the most successful county in Kansas. And we've got to make sure that we have a school finance formula that's going to allow us to continue with that. So we're working on that. Second, the last committee I serve on is taxation. And Representative Clayton and I both serve on that committee. And I think we need to look at the entire tax plan in Kansas, in my opinion, that we've got to make sure that every group is paying their fair share and that it is being distributed properly throughout the state. And I think that people talk about property taxes, and absolutely, that's probably the number one issue in my district and probably across the state. But we need to look at sales tax, and we need to look at income tax as well. So that's we're working with some people on that to come up with a plan, hopefully in January, that we can support as Democratic Party, and will make our tax plan in Kansas much more equitable and fair for everybody in the state. So that's kind of my report for this month, and I'd be happy to stand for questions when it's time. So thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Representative Stogsdill. Good morning, everyone. I'm Melanie Haas. I represent District 2 on the State Board of Education. That is the northeast corner of Johnson County and parts of Wyandotte County. Good to see you all. Thanks for coming out on this lovely hot August day. I got a list for you. I brought my whole book today, so I'll try to contain it. I want to start with, let's see, maybe I'll start with Senator Corson kind of alluded to this with the lunch dollars. And so I'll just talk briefly about the issue of opt-in versus opt-out when we talk about what's going on in schools. So an example of this that is not like his would be, I have a colleague who wants parents to opt in to their children using devices in schools. right? I've been here every month talking about how I'm working on this device topic because as a parent, as the only board member the only member of the State Board of Education who has a child in public schools currently, meaning everybody else's kids have aged out, I've been working on this for a long time, wanting to minimize the use of those one-to-one devices, especially in elementary school, when I believe that those younger students especially need to be doing other things with their time than staring at a screen. So one of my colleagues wants to have parents opt in to using those devices should the school decide that they want to use them at any level. This becomes an equity issue. His argument is parents should be more involved. We need to get parents back in the game. They're not doing their duty. However, if you stop and think about the number of households that only have one parent, the number of students whose parents are maybe both working multiple shifts all the time, asking those folks to show up for parent-teacher conferences in a particular window, when you think about how hard it is already for them to get the time off to go and enroll in school if they have to be there in person, all of those opt-in opportunities where they have to be there to make something happen, those are challenging for them. An opt-out in the case of, say, devices is a little bit easier because we're automatically opting everyone in. And then if you need to opt out, you can opt out. Kind of see the difference there? So that's a challenge, I think, for a lot of parents, a lot of working parents, and we know that that's the majority of Kansans. So anytime we can do something like enroll students for free lunch without them having to do the extra work, that is an equity issue. That is benefiting those students and making sure that they can sit down at their desk with a full belly and be able to learn, right? So I hope that helps there. Real quick, what the state board did in July. So we actually did a couple of unusual things. We got a training from the Attorney General's office on CORA. Everybody know what CORA and COMA are? These are abbreviations, KORA, Kansas Open Records Act. And then there's COMA, the Kansas Open Meetings Act. So open meetings means that if you're having a legislative discussion, let's see. Nope, I'm not even going to go down that path. We'll stick to the state board. Kansas open meetings is when we have our monthly board meetings, they have to be open. You have to be able, as the public, to walk into our boardroom and watch the meeting. We don't have to broadcast them, but we do. You can watch them on YouTube. Sometimes we have workshops. We're going to do another one of those in August. It will be an open meeting because the quorum of the state board will be there, meaning more than half the board will be there and will be convening. So we have to have that meeting be open, but we probably, we have the option to whether or not we decide to broadcast it. We got in a little bit of trouble on the Open Records Act because we had a whole bunch of requests coming in from a few singular sources asking for information. They wanted records requests from the department. There were so many of them that, frankly, some of them got a little bit mixed up. There was at least one email that didn't get routed to the proper person. And so the Attorney General's office did an investigation, slapped their hand a little bit and said, hey, State Board of Education, meaning Department of Education, because they're the ones who usually receive the requests. We're going to require that you go through this training. So if you want to watch the Kansas Open Records Act training, that's at the end of the day on Wednesday in the July board meeting. It was actually kind of fun. It was really nice to have somebody there who could answer our questions when otherwise we're asking our attorney and sometimes he's not quite sure. He's like, let me check and get back to you on that. So I would recommend if you're not familiar with those and you really want to be politically engaged, go read up on the Open Records Act and understand what your options are for requesting information, not just from the state board, but from any state agency, from the legislature. You can ask for emails. Do you know that? Like if you have a couple of names, you can be like, I want the emails between this person and that person. They may tell you no for a variety of reasons. There are certain things that are protected. But I think that's an interesting one. So I encourage you all to check that out because I know that you're just those kinds of people, right? And then another one, let's see, we kicked off the meeting with, of course, top of the meeting on Tuesday. You can always watch the commissioner's report. And then right after that, we had a history lesson on America's origin. And then for lunch, we went and visited Constitution Hall. So if you need something to do in Topeka, I highly recommend Constitution Hall. It has been renovated. It's right in downtown Topeka. Some of the early photos of it are fascinating because Topeka's not there. It just starts with that building right there on that street. So recommend that one. And then I want to talk a little bit about, we had a PPC case. So this is the Professional Practices Commission. I tell you guys all the time, about how in any given month, we may have to take away a teacher's license because of a poor choice that they made, right? Sometimes those choices are so egregious that we say, you know what, we don't think you should be in schools anymore. And I also tell you all the time, I'm not always an expert. I rely on experts and I rely on people closer to the situation to advise me. So in the case of the PPC, the Professional Practices Commission is a group of teachers, professionals who sit in that room, who listen to each of those arguments as they come up for individual educators and decide on their own whether or not they think that they should recommend to the state board whether to take away or let that teacher keep their license. These are never good discussions. It sucks to take away a teacher's license. You guys, they work really hard for it. You know how hard teachers work, but sometimes mistakes happen. And so we had one this month where our attorney stood in front of us and he said, I got to tell you guys, this one's different. I knew when I walked in the room and I started hearing the conversations, I could see the looks on people's faces, and something about this wasn't right. And so in this particular instance, the teacher in question was a first-year teacher. It was the first year he'd ever taught. And he had sent text messages, not explicit, is my understanding, but sent some text messages to a student that he shouldn't have been sending text messages to. In the meantime, before this case in front of us, he actually went out and he went through therapy. He went through some trainings. He did a lot of work to get himself personally back to a place where he felt like he was better educated on what he should and shouldn't be doing, and expressed that remorse. The student's family had actually been involved in this case before it came to us, and so the student's father was saying, I would like to see this young man keep his license. The student was also kind of part and parcel to that recommendation, and the Professional Practices Commission told us, we're recommending that you allow him to keep it based on the work that has been done, documented. And so the board voted. Do I have the number? It's hard to do this with one hand. But the board did vote. Remember, it takes 6 votes to pass anything at the state board, regardless of how many members are present. And the board did vote to allow him to keep his license. It's what happened next that concerns me, because the barrage of email that we got was very interesting, orchestrated, angry, hateful, and uninformed. And I wrote one of the senders back and I said, did you watch the board meeting? Here's the link. Go check it out. Because the accusations that you are leveling are concerning, and that's not what happened. And it turned out the source of that information, the source of that anger, was the Sentinel newspaper. Gonna air quotes, thank you. I heard that. Oh, the Sentinel newspaper in air quotes. We have a handful of papers in this state, papers. They're opinion sites, they're propaganda sites, and our residents around the state are reading them as news. And so this article came out saying the state board let this molester, this groomer, keep their license, and that's not what happened at all. And I was very frustrated. And I want you to hear this because we are right in the thick of election season, and we have opinion sites posing as real news sites. And someone in my own family sent me one of the articles, someone who I really respect, and they were like, oh, did you see this? And I'm like, that's not a news site. So you might let your friends and family know. If it says Sentinel, I believe there's one called The Lion, Heartlander. There are a handful of these sites. I just want you to be aware and keep an eye out, because I think that this is causing a lot of distrust. On a happier note, we talked about the budget. So in June, we go through the governor's budget, we take a look at it. In July, the state board goes through the budget line by line, we talk about it again, and then we decide, do we like the recommendation that is being made by the governor for funding on a particular item? You want to talk about special education funding? The State Board of Education recommended seven votes for and a couple of votes against, recommended to fully fund special education at the 92% with a phase-in over a couple of years. This is a big deal, because previously, when we voted last year, we could only get the board to, I told you we tried year over year to get a recommendation. Let me back up there. For several years, we recommended 92%. Let's jump to 92%. Okay, let's try to phase into 92%. Okay, last year we said, fine, can we have 80%? And so this year the board came back and said, no, we've got to get to 92%. The state board recognizes across the board that this is something that has to happen. So yes, thank you for the applause. That's a very big deal. We had a lot of things. I want to say quickly that I talked a little bit about the devices, and I want to circle back to that because Wichita did come in front of us on Wednesday, and their IT folks, well, their superintendent talked about how their IT folks are doing a really great job. I'll just hit real quickly on the fact that they have been able to figure out how to block YouTube shorts on their school devices. This is a big deal because it's one of the biggest complaints that I hear from parents. When these devices do go home, kids will get on YouTube, maybe innocently enough to watch that math video that they were supposed to watch, but YouTube likes to feed them these shorts, and then they just keep rolling. And there was an article, a parent in Wichita had complained that her kid had watched thousands of these shorts, hours and hours of YouTube, and I've seen it myself. I can see the traffic. Depending on which district you're in, as a parent, you have different access to see what your kids are doing on their devices. And so there are lots of different stories with lots of different platforms. But I was really encouraged to hear this presentation from Wichita because they were telling the board, we're doing these things that a lot of other districts have been saying they can't do. So we're going to keep working on this device topic. I think it's really important. I'll touch briefly on AI because that's what we're going to move into as a board next once we get past the device conversation. And I just wanted to say that I'm noticing that AI is now being employed to build the presentations that are sometimes coming in front of the board. So where previously a person had to sit down and put their slides together, now they can just ask AI to do it. So I lose a little bit of confidence. Excuse me. When I see a slide deck that's generated with AI. And the other thing that we're seeing is that in the special education realm, we're seeing many more complaints that are being generated by AI. So a parent who wants to file a complaint will go and use AI to help them write that complaint. The complaint ends up being long, wordy, hard to understand, and doesn't always really reflect what it is that the parent is asking for. It creates another layer of work for our special education teams at the Department of Ed. So those are just some of the things that we're starting to see. I'll pause there and let the next person go, and you guys can ask me questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. Get my mic a little closer. My name is Becky Fast, and I'm your county commissioner in the Northeast. If you live in the Northeast, inside the 435 Beltway, also represent Leawood, south to 143rd. So on your ballot, you will see a county chair vote. So I am nonpartisan. The county chair is nonpartisan. I have many people been asking me, so everyone's running for the county chair is Republican, or everyone running for the county chair is Democrat? No, they're on your ballot whether you choose a Republican or a Democrat because they're nonpartisan. So be sure to vote on that race. I will be up in November, but I do not have a primary. I do have an opponent. That is why you will not see my name on your ballot. So after 2 years of planning, Johnson County government with the cities in the county, with our metro neighbors, Kansas City, Missouri, for the World Cup, it ended. And we all took a breath of fresh air and sigh of relief because we were planning for terrorist attacks. We were planning for maybe a shooting spree. Our law enforcement, MEDAC, planning to have international visitors. International visitors, they don't call 911, they call a different number. So if they call their number in a major accident, how does it connect to 911? So there was many layers of planning. And how many of you watched a World Cup game? Woo! Did any of you go to Theater in the Park watch party? No, they had over 10,000 visitors at our Theater in the Park watch party. Did anyone go to the Kansas City Fan Fest down at the World War I? Great. So in the data from KC 2026, they showed about 140,000 people used transit. And about 50% of those were national visitors. So we had planned on 50% being international. and then a third local and a third international. And so there was a different sort of visit with people who came nationally. They came like a day or two before the match and left a day after the match. We were planning on, 50% international and people staying a whole week. So there was, the statistics will show a little bit different data because of the different type of visitor. A number of countries, we heard 11 countries, their residents had difficulty getting tourist visas. Even Canada had difficulty getting tourist visas, was one of the reasons why. So Kansas City really got some great spotlight. We were the highest ratings for TV viewing in the nation, which is pretty exciting. We led the nation in terms of one of the top cities for hotel occupancy, for dining, for beer sales, for Airbnb. The New York Times had an article which was so wonderful. It said, smallest city hosting had the World Cup at its feet. Really incredible article. Our airport doesn't have a lot of international flights, but during the quarterfinals, it hit record number of flights going out of KCI. So we had some, real impacts. We're still, analyzing it because we're planning, like with our transit, to have, really steady transit for a whole month, and that didn't happen. We still have our Johnson County Airport. If you're going to the airport, please use that. It will be open till mid-September. And so, really highlighted that Kansas City is a soccer capital. We got that in the news. We have where the River Market is, KC Currents. We have KC Sporting at KCK. We had 4 teams, staying here. Argentina, which played twice. That was huge. And right here in Prairie Village, we had England. They wrote this wonderful letter that's in the news about how that staying in Prairie Village in Kansas City, they attribute to their success and how well they were treated by our police, staff, and residents. They love seeing the signs, "Go England," "Good luck, England." And so it's just a wonderful letter from the England team. That is something that Kansas City is going to continue to work on. They're working on getting the 2031 Women's FIFA World Cup. So there's more because of how well it went this last month. So another quick issue, we have Johnson County Health Department. I'm very proud of it. If you need vaccinations, we have a very strong maternal health care. We have this huge community garden for women, infant and children, low-income women that volunteers work on. We provide postnatal education for women. So really strong support. One of the roles is infectious disease monitoring. And I don't know if you've heard about this outbreak in multiple states called I can't say it right, the Cyclosporellus. It's a parasite that they have found in lettuce. And the FDA recently recalled iceberg lettuce grown in central Mexico, impacting 27 states, Kansas and Missouri. So the Kansas Department of Health and Environment has a dashboard, and on the dashboard, you will see that Johnson County's had 95 cases. We traditionally have 15. So we're the highest in the state, but a lot of these cases are not reported. And so they have been interviewing the people they've interviewed. They found since July 1st reported consuming shredded lettuce from grocery stores or restaurants. So that kind of aligns with what the national news is saying. So if you have, please contact our public health department if you have any questions about this, if you're feeling sickness, please, be in contact with them. They want to support you and help you in any way with your questions and and educating, because we want a healthy, thriving community in Johnson County. So thank you. And where did Rep. Clayton is next?
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, guys, home stretch. So I'm Representative Stephanie Clayton. Representatives Owsley and Representative Shue are out of town because this is a pretty normal time to, be out of town doing stuff with family. So I'll be closing it up for us today before we head to Q&A. So I, like many other folks, if you get a Democratic ballot, I will be on your ballot. I am unopposed in the primary. But unlike a lot of folks in this area, I actually do have opposition in the general election. So you will see me showing up and knocking at your doors. My district is from Metcalf to State Line, 83rd to 103rd, although if you are east of Mission, it is Somerset to 95th. So if you look at that, the map that is closest to us, I am the lovely Chartreuse district that is right there. Thank you so much. So was really hoping for aubergine, but you kind of get what you get when that happens. So I have had the pleasure of serving House 19 since 2012. So I have just finished up my 14th legislative session. And because I got elected when I was 5, right? No, but in any case, a lot of times the legislature, we are fortunate enough to not have any special legislative sessions during the summer. As you know, sometimes we've had those. In 16, we had one for education. We had one a couple of years ago regarding taxes and star bonds. And so this summer we are mercifully quiet. But that does not mean that we stop working. So for instance, one of my favorite things to do for my constituents that I just get a real charge out of doing is, they will contact me and say, oh, I lost my driver's license. Well, guess what? I'm your gal. If anything happens, especially with the DMV, we all have opportunities to speak to our legislative liaisons with various departments, right? And so there's no basically your representative allows you to skip the lines. So if you lose your driver's license, for the love, please reach out to me. I've got a guy. If you haven't gotten your Kansas tax return yet, which does happen, and that would be awful. I sure hope that, you would definitely, but again, we've got a guy. So make sure that you are using us as what we technically are, which is we're your customer service professionals. This is a customer service job. And so although we're not in session, I like to do things like that. And, and I also am the member of a number of sort of internet or just national groups, right? So for instance, I just got elected to the executive board of the National Council for Gaming Legislative States. And so Kansas belongs to this because, of course, Kansas is a state where a number of forms of gambling are legal. And so what this group, we call it Nickel G's for short, we meet twice a year, and we have a lot of discussions, not just with legislators, but with regulators, so lottery commissioners. Of course, you have folks that are from the problem gambling prevention. We have people that are also, from, like DraftKings and that sort of thing. So you have all of these people who converge and have these important discussions. So this is something that I, in the event that I am reelected and that you all send me back, one of the things that I will be working with colleagues on is, how many of you all have heard of call sheet? All right, so call sheet is not exactly like sports wagering, right? It is what is called a prediction market. So it works like the stock market, sort of. Well, here's the thing with call sheet is that guess what? You can go on call sheet and you can make a bet for who you think is going to win the Republican gubernatorial primary in Kansas, or who you think is going to be the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate. And if you scroll down, it's interesting. It says no insider trading. But here's the thing. So for instance, Senator Corson, who is running for governor, he can't bet on his own race because he knows things, right? Obviously, at least about his own campaign. But you know who can? I can. Representative Stogsdill can. And guess what? Just because you're not on the ballot or because you are not a staffer for a campaign, guys, I think that's kind of giving Pete Rose, right? And I don't think that that's okay. There are things. So for instance, what if I wanted to come in with a last minute endorsement for a U.S. Senate candidate? Now let's operate under the assumption that if I endorsed anyone, it would make a difference in their race, right? But let's just pretend that that was the issue, right? Well, that is insider trading. And guess what? If you are a state legislator, you can get involved in that. That's not okay. I don't like that. I think that that's very wrong. So what I will be doing at the national level is working to create just model legislation, which usually when we think of model legislation, we think of more conservative groups or bill mills. But guess what? A lot of times that sort of national collaboration, especially working with groups like Kalshi, which I think actually brings more integrity to the process, ends up helping us out. And definitely that is something where, and again, I'm working with legislative research to make sure that this is something that even can be done at the legislative level, but to make sure that we can't do that in Kansas. So that's one of the projects that I'm working on this summer. On Monday, I'm going to go to Chicago for the National Council of State Legislators, or NCSL. So that's huge. And it's kind of awesome because my daughter lives in Chicago. I have so many, she graduated in December actually and walked in May, and she has a job in fashion. So I have a lot of people saying, is she going to move back home? And I'm like, no. Like, again, we have excellent fashion sense here in Johnson County, no doubt, but the job market in Chicago is significantly better. And she managed to get an excellent job in the one recession-proof industry, which is bridal. People are always out there getting married. So, but in any case, so I will enjoy my time visiting with my daughter, but also I will be paying a lot of attention to what people are saying about tax policy. And again, like a lot of folks who aren't from here, their eyes tend to glaze over when we talk about tax policy, especially property tax. But you all are kind of the ride or dies. Like you show up, you guys are bringing your notepads. I see you taking notes when we talk, and I love that about you because it means that you are some of the most engaged citizens that we have. And so the property tax discussion is huge, in particular in my legislative district, where I've got constituents that, so I belong to Round Hill Pool, which, sounds like a country club. But if any of you know Round Hill, it's a tiny pool with a 1930s barn and some questionable tennis courts. Anytime people like from say like Indian Hills or Mission Hills come to play us in 10 cap, they're like, what is this? But anyway, but we're the most fun. But so we talk a lot about this, and I've got constituents telling me that their mortgage payment because of property taxes went up, $400 or $500 a month. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I can't find $400 extra a month unless I'm going out and getting a third job. And these are folks that just have, like your everyday, like, your Overland Park split level, right? So it's not like they are having, some massive home. And they are happy to pay these property taxes because they enjoy the services. But here's the problem and I was talking with the Kansas Association of Realtors about this. They like to kind of get together with a lot of us this time of year because you have people that say, all right, one way to solve the property tax issue is to cap valuations at 3%. Well, that's great for someone like me because, guess what? My mortgage interest is at 3%. I'm leaving my house in a body bag. I can't afford to go anywhere else, even if I wanted to, right? And you have a lot of older folks that, you're happy in your homes. But what the problem is, of course, is that this benefits people that stay in their homes, makes it very difficult for young families like my daughter who, maybe she'll come back. I don't know, probably not. But let's say hypothetically, like kids that age that are trying to start a family, which this is an excellent place to raise a child. I can certainly attest, right? And so can you. But that locks a lot of them out. So it looks good on paper, but in the reality of the situation, it is not a viable solution. We have, some people that want to basically cap property tax, any sort of anything that local government would do. So this would just basically be stymieing, what Commissioner Fast or our city council or our school boards, our local boards of education would do when it came to levying local taxes. But the thing is that we don't want that either because we like our services here. That's why I live here. It's not like, I'm going to say that total cliche Kansas thing. We don't have mountains or oceans. I said it. I've been trying not to say it for years, but it is true. I'm not here for the gorgeous scenery. I'm here for the quality of life. And so that causes issues with that. So one solution that I like to look at, and I know that we have talked about how we don't like the gut and go procedure when it comes to any sort of legislative procedure. So basically what that does is that it strips the contents of a bill and inserts the contents of another bill. But as a member of the minority party, we have to be very creative because you know what? We're not getting a hearing on our bills. We're certainly not getting the bill worked in committee, and we're definitely not getting it worked on the floor. They might say, oh, yeah, Stephanie, we'll have a hearing, and then that's all that happens. And that's if I'm lucky, and I have to burn political capital to get a hearing on something I know is not going anywhere. So you save the political capital for other things, and you do a gut and go amendment. So what I did in tax committee, and Stogsdill was there for that, and then I did it again on the floor, was to gut the current this bill that came from the Senate side, and Ethan didn't support it. Like he's a very reasonable guy, but that came from the Senate side that would have capped valuations at 3%, and instead insert it with a constitutional amendment so it would still go to a vote of the people that would drop assessed valuations for residential property that's currently at 11.5, and it would drop it down to 9%. So it would provide relief for residents. And why is that important? So first of all, I'll talk to a lot of folks and they'll say, well, that's just a tax shift. That means that ag will be paying more or commercial will be paying more. Well, guess what? Over the last 10 to 15 years, commercial in particular has gotten lots of little exemptions, little carve outs where they don't have to pay as much. And it's one of those things where, I vote no on almost all of them because they're a bad idea. And I know how to play the long game when it comes to taxes. And I know that if you take away, if one person gets cuts, there tends to be a shift. And so what has happened is that it's been kind of like a little war of attrition, the frog boiling to death in the pot. And unfortunately, the frog is you guys, residents and renters, because guess what? Landowners and landlords and apartment complex owners who, when their property taxes go up, it gets passed on to their tenants. So even if you rent, you are getting hurt by this. And so I don't like to think of this as a tax shift so much as a tax realignment, because we know what has been happening. And of course, we support business. We do. We want business to thrive in Johnson County. We need that. But also, those exemptions that commercial has been getting to their property tax have been shifted onto us, the everyday people. And with our housing shortages, not to mention the incredibly high demand, we are feeling it. And I think that I hear that from a lot of folks. So to me, that is the solution. Now, we'll see if anyone agrees with me in the legislature. As I said at our last forum, one of the best ways to get things done is to convince a Republican man it's his idea, and then he makes it happen. And then, hey, we don't care. If the money gets saved, the money gets saved. So that is, again, what I'll be working on. I was also appointed to an interim committee. I am on the Board of Emergency Medical Services, which is interesting because I have zero medical background, but I think that's part of the reason why they want, and they need to put a House Democrat, House Republican, Senate Democrat, Senate Republican on there. And so there are some concerns with the way that board, their lay people that they have been appointing has been functioning. So we are having an interim committee to study that. That will meet for one day. A lot of times I substitute for colleagues that can't make it to committee. So I like to substitute on administrative rules and regs, which really drills down to basically the nitty gritty of how our laws are, just put into place and how they're enforced. And then legislative post-audit, which you can basically request that there be a deeper dive study done into legislation. And so we take a look at that. So it really, just allows the big nerd in me to kind of come out. And then, what I do also this time of year is that I'm looking forward to school starting again. So, and I want to say I'm very grateful for my legislative salary. And I want to thank you, the taxpayers, for making sure that I have a roof over my head and food on my table. But I also have a 16-year-old son, and although my daughter is successfully launched, anytime I get a text from her that says, "Mommy," we know what that means. That means a Venmo request, right? So, they're adorable, they're expensive. So last year I had the pleasure of being a substitute teacher in the Shawnee Mission District. And so when Senator Corson said that this was our 67th consecutive forum, I was the one that said 6-7 because I think it's hilarious. but also because I mostly ended up working with middle schoolers and high schoolers. Not because I don't like young children, but I'm kind of afraid of vomit, and also I kind of have like a grumpy voice, right? So I'm afraid that I might upset a younger kid. So in middle school, let's be honest, you guys know my temperament and my maturity level. I'm secretly 12. So, but it has been a wonderful opportunity that has made me a better legislator to sort of see the way that things are really going in our classrooms. It'll be very interesting to see the way that the bell-to-bell phone ban has taken place. I think Shawnee Mission has sent something out saying like, hey, if you get caught with it, you follow the discipline matrix. I talked about it with my 16-year-old son. Man, he's 16. Let's see what happens. I don't know if he gets busted with his phone or not. That remains to be seen. School starts in mid-August. But I've really talked quite a bit, so I'm going to go ahead and stop now and get to the best part of this, which is hearing from you guys and your questions. It's a lot easier to come here in the air conditioning and hear what your concerns are instead of stalking you at your doorstep. Some of you guys have really long driveways. So thank you so much for coming, and we're all going to come up here and and take the questions. So.
All right, we want to get everybody out of here by 10:15 at the absolute latest, so we'll try to do these quickly.
Yeah, just a quick question. You mentioned the big beautiful bill and the article or paper or whatever. Where can we get that?
The Kansas Reflector was the one that was covering that covered it. It was it was several nonprofits who were working together, did it, and the Kansas Reflector reported on it.
Good morning, Patricia Fenn from Prairie Village. In April, the governor signed into law Senate Bill 20, which is the Kansas Consumer Prescription Protection and Accountability Act. Would you comment on two aspects about the conditions that were applied to pharmacy benefit managers? There's a $10.50 fee, administrative fee applied to the benefit managers. Could you comment on the reasoning for that? And do you foresee that that fee might be passed on to consumers when the plans are changed in open enrollment?
So this was what we called our PBM reform bill. I think I touched on this at one of our previous town halls that, we have this issue where pharmacy benefit managers, which are essentially the middle person between the prescription drug companies and the pharmacists, that they had really captured a large segment of the industry, and they were charging different prices to different pharmacies. And what had happened in Kansas is that because of this practice, many of our pharmacies in our rural areas either have closed or at risk of closing. And so you have a lot of seniors who are in the position of, in order to get their prescription filled, having to drive 90 minutes or more. So what we did is we did what a lot of other states either have done or in the process of doing to try to put some more guardrails around how our pharmacy benefit managers can operate. And the $10.50 fee will not be passed on to customers. And so I think this to me was, I mentioned last month, this was to me one of the two really good things that we did this session, is because it should drive down prices for consumers and make sure that there's more uniformity in, if you get a prescription filled at, this CVS in Johnson County, versus this local pharmacy in Johnson City, Kansas, that you are paying the same price as a consumer. So we're trying to level the playing field so it's more fair for consumers and it's more fair for our local pharmacies, because in the pharmacy industry, you have a huge amount of consolidation of Walgreens, CVS, I forget what the other, but there's 3 or 4 that own over 85% of the market. And and the pharmacy benefit managers have sort of been captured by the big players. And this, I think, will help equalize things across the state, especially for small and rural pharmacies. So I think it was a big win. I mean, I think they pay the fee because they are taking a giant cut. And so I think it was to try to, spread it out a little bit more.
Senator Corson, you're running for an elected office. What happens to your current position in the Senate if you're elected?
I don't want to put the cart before the horse, although we do feel really good about our campaign. It would be an election by the precinct committee people within my Senate district. It would be filled by an election by the Democratic precinct committee people in Senate District 7. So, all right, we'll do a couple more, and then I do want to respect everybody's time and get folks out of here.
This question is for Becky. With FIFA and the bus ride that we had from the international airport to Sheridan, I think it was. How did that go? Was it successful? Did we have a lot of riders? And is it something that might continue?
So we just have data for the first month, and what we saw was the majority were local residents, not the international. We were expecting large numbers of international. And so it wasn't a huge number the first month, but the second month is when we had much more visitors coming in. And so, I mean, we're hoping to see that data. Right now we only have funding to September. So in order to do the transit, we have to draw upon federal, state, and then local tax dollars. And the county's really getting a lot of cuts on the federal, state, residents. I hear every week, do not raise my property tax. I can't pay any more property taxes. So it is a balance where do we find efficiencies? What new services? So this was a pilot. We heard, 80% of the people who took it loved it. And so it is, and the thing is about new services, people are always hesitant, to try a new service. I mean, something like this takes some time for people to use it, to tell others, to build. We increased our marketing. But I think, like I said, what we saw at the World Cup, the majority of people coming were national people with cars. And we thought the majority of people coming would be international, so would use this. But it was exciting to see the people using it with our local residents. For us in the Northeast, it wasn't, I went on a trip this summer, I would have had to go down to the Sheraton or Lenexa. So we really needed a stop in the Northeast too. But people in Southern Johnson really loved it because their loved one could go and drop them off. So, we're really working on trying to have more frequent transit, because when it's more frequent, more people use it. And so that is our goal.
Thank you.
All right. Well, hey, was there one more? All right, we'll do one more and then we'll wrap it up.
Not a question, but a comment.
Let's for the folks on Zoom, I want to make sure they can.
Comment on this. Can you hear this? Comment on the 3-day waiting period. My neighbor and I filed a joint appeal of our property taxes. We've not heard anything back from the assessor's office on the status. So my neighbor called and said the appeal had been denied and that a mailing talking about that denial and why it was denied was mailed May the 24th. I still haven't received that email, that denial in the mail. And it's been more than 3 waiting days to get here. And I still don't have it.
All right. Well, everybody remember, be sure to get out and vote. I told you voting's open right now. Lamar and Martway in Northeast Johnson County building. Be sure to vote on your way home, and we will see you next month. Thank you so much.
I'm actually going to go vote right